The insurrection against these United States facilitates the position of all forms of hate crimes by unofficial acts, leveraging the use of government equipment for the purpose of hate crimes, such as would have actively been done by the KKK if they have infiltrated the government and gained access to the intelligence agencies and made themselves capable of classifying KKK activities from inside the government, which, seeking to overthrow the United States, would acknowledge David, according to discovered military intelligence, to put the white hats beneath the black hats and to crush Congress's authority over the executive permanently, and thus completely disregard the function of congressional oversight of the presidency, and thus the action of the disillusionment of David's department would be fundamental, and thus the action of David as a six-star general being able to rival the presidency in its criminal actions, such as the position of, I believe, Jefferson said that you have made an order and now enforce it, and the action of president is obligated to faithfully execute the laws of the United States, and thus the action of having refused the action became participating in the separatist action of being unfit for office, qualifying the impeachments, which would have happened without the targeting of David's department, removing David's capacity as a legal company, as a legend company, facilitating the function of all of the preparations that they would have had to have made, which would then facilitate his capacity to arrest them, and thus the action of compelling the executive to comply with the action after the president would be impeached and removed, and thus the action of the preservation of the constitutional republic against usurpations by subtlety and the use of progressive minor adjustments as the checks and balances become systemically unbalanced until the legislative and judiciary become completely irrelevant and subjugated to the king of the executive, which is not functionally the president under unitary executive theory, but the plausible deniability of the Wizard Council of the White Supremacist Confederacy, who conduct all of the powers of the presidency above the presidency, which he has no remedy for and cannot fire because they are not in an American constitutional republic function. They are a separatist insurrection, terrorist insurgency of enemy combatants to the American republic and its constitution, qualifying the obligation of the Declaration of Independence as superior law to be enforced as the context for the Constitution, which would force the dual, compelling the immediate enforcement of its remedies. And that includes, but is not limited to, the acknowledgement of the obstructed title of David Bowles and other essential to national security figures, which would then restore the original value according to that system, which would then redeem the function of the United States government and purge itself from all enemies, foreign and domestic, as they would currently, in that example, have restored the military police loyal to the United States, who are in that action unwilling to commit treason for its enemies or sell it to a foreign government, which is the Confederate separatists' absolute goal, such as the double agent Confederates who have actively declared war on the United States, and having declared war, such as the character for Crenshaw, Lindsey Graham, Jay Sekulow, and many of the others actually materially use the function of hate crimes of criminal action, which Donald Trump complains about being leveraged against him, but they do so, and thus the action of having protected them in these actions is the establishment of the precedence of everything that Donald Trump complains about as being unfair treatment towards himself, which should have been a protection for everyone else, which does not have a nation of law, as the function of the law is subverted, as they do not even respect that the Constitution of the federal government is superior to the states or their definition of their constitutions, which legally are beneath the other, and thus the fact of their complete topsy-turvy world of complete pseudoscience and inferior intellectual defects, they, in all regards, become so enamored with their own magic spells that they forget that in a battle of wits they are always permanently unarmed. As white supremacists engaged in clan activity, they survive off of the function of corporate espionage and other theft functions. And as white trash, they have to rely on these types of thefts in order to establish any kind of value for themselves, as white trash is known for its innate poverty, and thus the action of their poverty determines the fact that they have to steal in order to eat, or for their system to continue to survive, as it is fully, like all communist functions that they've studied and admire with the highest glee and myrrh, facilitates the function of a completely unstable system, which is by design, as all will become equal in the disillusionment, and thus even those who would have established themselves of cutting the pyramid from the top to the middle so that they could become relevant as middle people be turned into the new top, would then facilitate their collapse into that system, as it would be compulsory for the complete eradication of all hierarchies and governments, which, of course, as fascists, they would completely deny even exist as a concept, such as the quote from Napoleano, Judge Napoleano, from Fox News, which by definition had this quandary concerning the function of crimes committed by judges, which states that how could they be convicted of anything because there is no functional definition of a government, which is a very much so Nazi legal theory, which they, as Confederates, had funded when creating the Great Depression by bankrupting Wall Street and the creation of the Nazi Party, and thus the function of refusing to enforce the money not being used for military action, which was the goal of the secret empire and its conspiracy under unitary executive theory to create enemies of the United States under the Hegelian dialectic, which facilitates their compulsion of the extortion of the American public into compliance with their military racketeering operation. And as a great general once said, war is a racket. And to this extraordinary butler, which David would consider, would facilitate the full manifestation of the diversity and complexities of the base concept, which would be publicly understood as the function of David's role as intelligence oversight, which would be necessarily in compulsion under the trust function of Don Bull Sr., which without the subversion by the white supremacists, such as the COINTELPRO terrorist operations where they contract KKK in order to assist them applying the function of deputizing them and amplifying them by the function of the use of secret equipment and weapons by the United States military and intelligence community mechanizes the function of a permanent white supremacist systematic racist society enforced covertly, which would be held off of the books, which would then falsify the records, which would then find gullible suckers to quote the false records, quite very confident and smirky with themselves, facilitates the superiority of their joking wit and banter, finding a complete august station by which they might promote themselves under this facilitation of the superiority of their logic, which is completely sound, as they, having received the function of the fake forgeries, which then they certify and tout as absolute competent reality, materializes the function of the compliance with the illusion which they are aware of, which then the functional position is the acknowledgement of the distribution of fake records in order to maintain their functional point in the function of their statist arrangement of the state construct that the state is capable of committing any crime, including violations of their own state laws as well as federal laws and the federal constitution and the state constitution, and thus the action of their complete disloyalty and disconnection as white supremacist separatists facilitates the full diversity of anything that they want arbitrarily whenever they want it as individuals without a legal government who have possession of the government's equipment, has no check and will maintain no balance, and is fully in the individual interest of the separatist secret society, which is the invisible empire of the Confederacy, at war with the United States in the perpetual function of voter fraud and the replacement of the American elected government, as they would wish to completely separate the civilian oversight of the United States government and its equipment, to disconnect it and to have their white supremacist Soviets be the exclusive electors thereof. By a series of usurpations similar to the function of the creation of the Declaration of Independence and its separation of the King of England, which is their goal as a permanent series of violations, which is their status quo custom, without reason, as their existence is the perpetration of fraud in the service of their liberty from God, which would have challenged them with some morals, which by definition makes him a violator as an anti-progressive, anti-revolutionary, who as the extraordinary demiurge must be exterminated at all costs that can be expended from theft or otherwise, and thus the complete eradication of all religion must have their active compromising and insurgencies inside churches of every kind of religion, that they too might be dissolved and subjugated into centralized religion, the state-established religion of the Confederacy, which would validate their self-delusions and their luxuries amongst their demonic lords, which enjoy their status quo domestic abuse in loyalty and perpetuation and distribution of their queerification of the normal in the propagation of the status quo minimum of their dominatrix sexualities. The function requires the removing of the restraints against David's title so that the duel might be arranged, which is an automatic order, which would then force Congress in order to acknowledge David's obstructed title according to the contract schedule, which is his actual real life person, and thus the action of their manipulation by their kidnappings, which facilitates their forgeries under that illusion, materializes the function of the actual legal title and its properties and the legal history, which would have been the obstructed thing, which would have been the primary creation of the American policies and laws, which would be obstructed and to be replaced by the Confederate ones, which then materializes the function of the usurpation and treasons for their perpetual war against the United States under the hybrid warfare technology and the fake posturing of their confidence game, asserting the function of their capacity to conduct the use of government action without the use of constitutional authority, and thus no service of law, and thus they are all unofficial acts, and thus the action being protected under the pseudo-lynchal position makes everything functionally an anarcho-communist state as their central planned white supremacist economy and its social connections and social connections create the function of sexual options, which then facilitates their absolute domination over every aspect of everyone's life, including who you get to date.